Subscribe now if you're brave enough to hear what happens after midnight. The new night groundskeeper, Mark, had only worked 3 weeks at the Crestwood Cemetery when the motion alarms started going off. The old mausoleum on the West Hill was supposed to be sealed shut cemented decades ago when vandals kept breaking in, but every night at 2:17 a.m. the same sensor tripped. The first time it happened, he thought it was a raccoon. The second night he stayed inside the small office, coffee in hand, watching the grainy black and white monitor flicker. There was nothing, just a faint pulse of blue light near the crypt door, like static trapped in the lens. Then, for one frame, he saw something that made him spill the coffee across the keyboard. It was himself, standing by the mausoleum door. He froze, replaying it over and over. The figure was identical. Same jacket, same flashlight, but he hadn't left the office all night. The timestamp matched the alarm. 2:17 a.m., his time card, which he'd clocked in earlier, also showed an extra entry at 2:17. It said, checked in, but he hadn't scanned his card again. His keys hung right beside him on the hook. He told himself it was a glitch, but his hand trembled as he locked the doors. The next morning, his supervisor joked about the muddy shoe prints leading from the office to the West Hill. "You must have gone for a walk in your sleep," she said. He forced a laugh, but didn't answer. His boots were clean. That night, the alarms stayed silent for hours. Midnight, 1 o'clock, nothing. The silence almost felt heavier than the noise. He dozed off in his chair, the hum of the heater fading into the dark. Then, click. The monitor snapped on by itself. The West Hill camera showed the mausoleum door wide open, swinging gently. A cold pressure filled his chest. He grabbed his flashlight and keys and stepped out into the fog. The air was wet, thick enough to feel. The cemetery lamps glowed pale against the mist. He walked faster when he noticed the footprints again, his own tread. Deep and fresh, leading toward the crypt. His breath caught as he reached the top of the hill. The heavy iron gate creaked open with a sound that scraped the air. Inside, the light from his torch wavered against stone walls. Empty alcoves, old marble, and on the floor, his name tag, still pinned to a torn strip of his uniform. When he turned to leave, the gate slammed shut. His radio crackled to life on his shoulder, though no one was on the other end. The speaker hissed, then whispered in a voice identical to his own. "I already checked in." The signal died. The flashlight flickered and went black. Outside, the cameras in the office kept recording. The mausoleum door stayed open, faint blue light seeping out like breath. And at 2:17 a.m., the system logged another entry Mark's ID, swiping in again. But the door to the cemetery office was never opened. The next morning, the cemetery manager, Ruth, found the office door locked from the inside and the night logs still running. Mark's truck sat in the lot, engine cold, keys dangling from the ignition. His jacket hung on the back of the chair, and the coffee in his mug was untouched, but the monitors were all frozen on the same frame, the West Hill mausoleum door glowing faintly in the dark. When the police came, they found no signs of a break-in. No footprints except Mark's own, stopping at the gate to the crypt. The interior showed nothing unusual except the strip of uniform cloth and the faint outline of a handprint on the inner wall, pressed deep into the dust as if from the inside. They ruled him missing, not harmed. Ruth called it an employee walking off mid-shift. But that night, when she came to check the system, she noticed something strange. At 2:17 a.m., exactly 24 hours after Mark vanished, the West Hill motion alarm triggered again. She pulled the footage frame by frame. The same blue static rippled across the mausoleum door. Then, in the next frame, Mark's figure appeared mud-stained, head tilted, his eyes reflecting the camera's light. His lips moved as if whispering, but there was no audio. She rewound it 3 times, convinced it was a glitch, until she heard the faintest sound from the office intercom. A low hum, almost like breathing. Ruth drove up to the mausoleum before sunrise, telling herself she just needed to confirm it was sealed. The fog was thick again, lying over the headstones like a blanket. She reached the gate and saw the padlock hanging open. Inside, the air smelled like wet stone. She aimed her flashlight ahead and froze. At the back of the crypt, something new had been etched into the wall. It wasn't carved with tools, but scraped with something blunt, uneven. Her light trembled as she read it. Keep the door closed. Ruth stumbled back and ran out into the open air. When she reached the office, the monitors flickered on by themselves. On the feed, she saw the gate she had just locked again already open and a shape, standing in the doorway, watching her. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m., though her phone said 6:42 in the morning. That night, she didn't go home. She stayed in the break room, lights on, trying to convince herself fatigue had made her see things. But when the clock hit 2:17 again, the intercom hissed to life. A male voice whispered, distant but clear. "Ruth, you forgot to check out." Her screen blinked with new log entries, each line repeating her name, over and over, time-stamped seconds apart. Then one more message appeared, unlike the rest. "Open the door. It's your turn." The lights in the office dimmed, and the last thing the camera captured was the door to the West Hill swinging open in the dark, as if someone inside had been waiting for her all along. By the time Ruth's car was found idling outside the cemetery gates, the town had already begun whispering about Crestwood again. Old stories resurfaced, how the mausoleum had once held the body of a man buried alive by mistake, how his family swore they heard knocking from inside for 3 nights before the vault was sealed forever. But police dismissed all of it. Ruth, like Mark, was declared missing. The cemetery closed for 2 weeks, while new locks were installed and cameras replaced. When they reopened, the new groundskeeper, a retired corrections officer named Dennis, Loft off the warnings. "Ghosts don't punch time cards," he said. He was meticulous, double-checking gates, logging every patrol, memorizing every sensor. For the first week, everything stayed quiet. Then came the second Friday. At 2:17 a.m., the motion sensor near the West Hill triggered. Dennis was in the break room, sipping instant coffee, when the monitor blinked to life. The camera feed glitched for half a second, then focused on a figure standing beside the mausoleum door. The posture was stiff, familiar. Dennis leaned closer. It was Ruth. Her uniform was soaked through, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide and unfocused. He sprinted out the door, flashlight in hand. The mist was thicker than before, swallowing sound. As he climbed the hill, his radio crackled with faint static, then a soft whisper, "You're late." When he reached the mausoleum, the door was open just a crack. A faint blue light pulsed from within, casting long shadows across the grass. He called out Ruth's name. No answer. He pushed the door wider, and the air rushed past him, cold, stale, and heavy with the smell of earth. His beam caught movement inside. For a heartbeat, he saw her standing at the far end, one hand on the wall, the other pointing at something on the floor. He stepped closer, squinting at the stone beneath her. There, etched into the dust, were two sets of footprints, one leading in, one leading out. Both matched his boots. Then Ruth turned. Only it wasn't Ruth anymore. Her skin shimmered with that same pale blue static he'd seen on the monitors. Her mouth opened, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. "Check in, Dennis." His flashlight flickered. The air trembled, and the light revealed dozens of faint outlines along the wall, people-shaped impressions pressed deep into the stone, like figures trapped just beneath the surface. Their faces were twisted mid-scream. In the corner, hanging by a single nail, was a faded employee name tag. Ruth, 2:17 a.m. Dennis stumbled back toward the door, but the fog outside had thickened into a solid wall. Every direction looked the same. He called for backup, but the radio emitted only his own voice whispering back, "Already here." At dawn, the grounds were empty again. The mausoleum stood sealed, its gate locked. On the office monitor, a new log entry appeared. Employee check-in. D. Thompson, 2:17 a.m. No one ever saw Dennis again. But every night since, the same motion sensor trips at the exact same time. And each time the feed plays back, there's a new figure standing beside the crypt door, watching the camera, waiting to be recognized. If you thought this story was chilling, the next one makes this look like a quiet shift. Hit subscribe because what comes after midnight might already be watching.